Hi, everyone. I'm Becky Stern with Common Cause. I think we're going to go ahead and get started. For press that is on the call, if you have any questions throughout, please just drop it in the chat with your name and your outlet, and we will get to it at the very end. Thanks. And I will kick it over to Susan Lerner, Executive Director of Common Cause New York.
Thanks so much, Becky. Hi, everybody. I'm Susan Lerner. I'm the Executive Director of Common Cause New York. As we have for the last 3 presidential cycles, Common Cause New York participated in the largest nonpartisan election protection program in the country, recruiting over 800 poll watchers across New York alone. Together with our partners at the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, which staffed the hotline, and our partners at Let New York Vote, we helped thousands of New Yorkers vote. Here's what we found. Election day in New York ran smoothly, thanks to a robust early voting period, the first of its kind in a presidential election here in New York State. Voters enthusiastically showed up to vote early, thus alleviating the burden on election day itself and providing the BOE with enough time to work out any kinks, which is exactly the benefit of not holding an election on a single day. Our data show that each day of early voting, when turnout increased on a day past the weekend, wait times decreased, as the BOE instituted better line management. There was unprecedented turnout, and of course, more early voting poll sites will help alleviate lines in the future. Wait times on election day itself were minimal. And although we were primed to respond to all sorts of problems across the state, we didn't receive many reports of problems, and we closed the hotline relatively early compared to other presidential years. However, in Suffolk County, we received over 80 reports of broken machines in over 50 locations across the county. The problem was not concentrated in any one particular area, but was sporadic throughout the county. So what's next? Over 2 million absentee ballots were sent to voters, and as of last week, roughly 1 million had been returned. Absentee ballots are still making their way to local boards with a deadline for receipt of November 10th. Statewide, nearly 20% of the potential electorate voted early. 45 of New York's 62 counties will start counting their absentee ballots on Monday, and that includes New York City. And that is exactly how it's supposed to work. Absentee ballots cannot be counted by law until 7 days after the election, and that timetable has been modified this year by the governor's executive order. Military ballots may, in some cases, not even be received until 16 days after the election. New York voters should understand that we will not know the results of many close races until more than a week later. And that is not the death of democracy, but rather a sign of life. Any candidate who declares victory too soon or seeks to invalidate the legal counting of ballots diminishes both military and other absentee voters as less worthy than those able to cast their votes in person. The Board of Election can and must count absentee ballots carefully. I'm very pleased that Valerie Mason, who most recently observed the absentee counting process after the June primary in Congressional District 12, has joined us, and she can speak more about the process. Valerie.
Thank you very much, Susan, and I want to congratulate Common Cause on a great effort to ensure voter participation. It's a great thing, and for me, I decided I wanted to participate in watching the counting of ballots because I wanted personal. It was very personal to me. I wanted to make sure that, in fact, everything that I had believed in terms of accuracy, honesty, integrity was being observed by the Board of Elections. And I was there for 14 days at the New York City Board of Elections, and I observed the painstaking process of making sure that the count was accurate and honest. And I can tell you that what I observed really buttressed my belief that everything is above board. These people take their jobs very seriously. It is a very tedious and long process, but everything is ticked and tied and the public can feel very confident that what is going on in the Board of Elections in the state of New York is an integrity-filled process. You can get a little bored during the day, but there is an excellent verification process. Even with the overwhelming number of absentee ballots that were filed in the June primary. I mean, we were looking at over 60,000 ballots, and you didn't mention it in what you just said, but I think the Board of Elections learned a lot from that process and has even made the process that we're going to see in these next 2-3 weeks a lot better. When I was there, in terms of ballots being invalidated, it was mostly because voters failed to sign their ballot, and the Board of Elections recognized that and have done as much as they can, I think, at least at this point, to ensure that the ballots are signed and the votes are counted. And I think we can sleep well at night knowing that, you know, each ballot is going to be counted, and that is in fact the process.
Thank you so much, Valerie. And we're going to open it up to the press for questions to me.
Yes, press, if you have any questions. I know a bunch of people got on also while Susan was in the middle of speaking, but if you have any questions, please drop it in the chat with your name and your outlet, and I will unmute you.
It's really a first if we flummoxed all of you.
We'll give people a few minutes. I think I'm going to venture to say a lot of people are tired.
Could be.
Okay, we have one from Chris Bolt. Rallies are, we got two now. We'll start with Chris since you were first. Rallies are planned to emphasize polling and counting at all the ballots. What would you say to the public? And Susan, I think this can be for you. Chris, feel free to unmute yourself if you want to expand on the question.
So it's my understanding actually that while there's planning for rallies, the decision as to whether or not to have rallies has not been made. But I think that the theme of the rallies, which is count every vote and protect the results, is exactly what the public expects and what our tradition here in the United States has been for over a century, that every vote should be counted and that we take the time necessary to get an accurate count, which, as Valerie points out, is painstaking and takes time.
Okay, we can go to the next question from Marla. Here, I can unmute you. You can ask a question and say what outlet that you're from.
Hi, Susan. I'm with WCBS Radio. I have a couple of questions. Can you give us a sense of how long we'll have to wait for final official results? And I'm wondering if you could talk a bit about vote counting in the Staten Island congressional race between Rose and Maliotakis.
Right. So as I said, in New York City, the count is not going to start until this coming Monday. And I've seen reports that we have approximately 500,000 absentee ballots to count. So that's going to take some time. And you know, the board has instituted procedures to speed up the count from the process in June with automatic sorting machines and an improved oath envelope, as Valerie mentioned. We're expecting fewer absentee ballots to be invalidated as incorrectly filled out, but it's going to take a while to count if indeed it is 500,000 ballots and the process is very careful, it's going to take a few weeks. I have seen speculation by the board that they hope to have the count done before Thanksgiving.
Okay. Also, how many absentee ballots have been returned? Can you talk a little bit about absentee ballots and how they're counted?
Sure. The absentee ballots is approximately 500,000. And actually that information is up on the New York City Board's website, broken down by borough. And I just haven't had a chance to add everything up, but I know it's about 500,000. And the process is painstaking. First, before any absentee ballot is opened, they are sorted, and any absentee ballot where there is a correctable problem, like there's a missing signature or a missing date, or the oath envelope was not sealed, since June, there are now procedures in place by statute, by executive order, and by a consent decree resolving a litigation brought by the League of Women Voters to give the voter an opportunity to cure that defect. But anecdotally, we've been hearing from boards that many fewer absentee ballots are coming in without signatures. And that's due to the fact that there was a redesign of the oath envelope statewide. And it is graphically much cleaner and easier to understand. The space where the voter has to sign is identified by an X, and the reply envelope that the oath envelope with the ballot goes into now has a checklist that tells you everything you need to do in order to be sure that your ballot is properly filled out and returned. And at least anecdotally, election officers are telling us that they are seeing that change in just the simple design of an envelope, making a real difference with more voters able to accurately follow the instructions. So they sort for any ballots that obviously have a problem. They then have time to contact the voter by email or phone, if they have their email or phone, or by letter, to give the voter an opportunity to cure that defect. They compare the list of people who voted in person with the list of absentee ballots. And if anybody has voted in person, their absentee ballot is set aside and not counted, because every New York voter has only one vote that counts. And here in New York, we permit people to override their absentee by showing up in person, and it's their in-person vote that counts. Then they have opened the envelopes, they've shared photocopies of the oath envelope with any candidate who asks for those photocopies. And I understand that the high-speed sorting machines also produce photocopies. So that process is being sped up. And it's only then when the representatives of candidates are present who raise any possible objections, and we're expecting many fewer this time around, that the actual counting process begins, and it's literally envelope by envelope.
Yeah, I mean, if I may, in
Sure.
terms of observing the June primary, even when there were observations made by each side in that election, and there were two Democrats running against each other, it was more any quote unquote objection that was made was really more for an inclusion of the vote than an exclusion of the vote. There was definitely the intention on both sides to have all votes that could be counted. And there's also, I think, Susan, correct me if I'm wrong, but even on the part of the Board of Elections, when all those envelopes are being monitored and counted, you have a representative of each political party sitting and watching those envelopes too, which I think also ensures fairness. So on both sides of the table, you have all political parties present that are involved in the election. And again, that should make everyone very comfortable that the process is being overseen and the integrity of the process is being maintained.
Absolutely. Thanks, Valerie.
And then we have a follow-up question from Chris Bolt. How upset are you, and should we all be, by claims to stop counting votes or with declarations of victory long before results are in? How misleading is this to the residents who don't really follow?
It's absolutely unacceptable, and no candidate should engage in that kind of propaganda. The voters should feel confident that the vote count is going to proceed. And as Valerie pointed out, it is painstaking and it takes time. So any candidate who is trying to disseminate misinformation, that should be rebutted, it should be refused, and the voters should know their vote's going to count.
And Marla, you put in a follow-up question. I don't know if you still have it, if you want to ask it.
Yes, I do. I'm trying to get back to the chat.
No,
but
I can read it
essentially-
if you want.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
Do you believe there are voter disenfranchisement in early voting, the lines, the wait, and what did the BOE do wrong?
So what we saw with early voting, and that early voting is a 9-day time period. So the likelihood that somebody was disenfranchised because of a line on the first day of early voting, I think is really very remote. What we saw was an unprecedented outpouring of enthusiasm on the part of voters. I will tell you honestly, those of us who are advocates for early voting, we're predicting a good turnout, but none of us anticipated the numbers that we saw. The election officials across the state were preparing for good turnout. Everybody was pleasantly stunned by the huge outpouring of enthusiasm. When you have people lining up at a early voting polling place starting at 5:30 or 6 in the morning for a 10 o'clock start, it's virtually impossible to catch up when you have 1,000 people outside before you even begin. I was impressed by the fact that the Board of Elections here and in other areas across the state really stepped up to try and figure out how to deal with this huge outpouring of voter enthusiasm, changing procedures, setting up better line management. And actually the largest number of voters surprisingly came on Tuesday and Wednesday of the week in between the elections. And you were not seeing the same sort of lines that you saw on that very first day. So I would say that the long lines had to do with the newness of early voting, and the boards were actually nimble in adjusting procedures. And on Tuesday and Wednesday, the lines moved very quickly, and they made adjustments based on what they were actually seeing on the ground. And that's what we want. We want an improvement process. We want a board that learns from the actual conditions and makes improvements.
If I may, I'm also on the community board of the Upper East Side Community Board 8 and on the voting task force there. And our location was the most crowded early voting location, with lines that were 5 hours, 6 hours at the very beginning. And to Susan's point, we were out there sending recommendations into the Board of Elections, and things started to change fairly rapidly when they saw the incredible response to the early voting. I don't think anybody really anticipated it. And I want to say also that the Fast Pass, because I had gotten an absentee ballot, but I think like many Americans wanted to vote in person because of a variety of factors making everybody a little bit wary about the absentee ballot. And so I thought, along with a lot of people on the Upper East Side, my community, that it would, if possible, to vote early would be the best scenario. I have to say that the Fast Pass that the Board of Elections created made the lines move very quickly once we were inside. And obviously, I think we will have additional locations the next time around, but they did respond quickly, moving ballot boxes for absentee drop off outside. I mean, we also have the extra added COVID concerns which minimize the number of people that could actually be in the building and voting. So to use Susan's words, BOE was very nimble about creating additional sites, and Rebecca Seawright and others got additional sites in the neighborhood, which alleviated the crowding, so much to the point with that on election day, I visited many of the polling sites on the Upper East Side, and there was absolutely no wait at all. So I think people are learning the lessons, and that, as Susan mentioned in the beginning, early voting in New York is really taking hold, which will be a good thing for everyone.
And works the way it should, which is to help spread out the number of voters over a longer time period. So we're not trying to cram what is 2.25 million people through that one day, 16-hour time period. And early voting was very successful in doing that.
And we have one last question from WAMC. The reporter, I don't know who it is. I'm going to unmute you so you can just say your name and you can ask your question. Hopefully. Well, the question is, any takeaway on performance of third parties like the WFP Conservative Party so far?
So that we don't, I think that is something that we're going to see how it plays out in the future.
Okay, and that appears to be, okay, thank you, Jesse King. That appears to be the last question. I'll give folks a minute or so, and I just want to let you all know, I know some of you jumped on late, but we will be putting out the recording, so with the audio and the video, so you'll be able to view that afterwards.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Becky. I did miss the beginning and the preamble here. I mean, what is the overall, the overarching message here in terms of voting?
So the overarching message is that Election Day in New York ran smoothly, thanks to a robust early voting period, and that voters enthusiastically showed up and the boards of elections made adjustments to deal with the unprecedented crowds during early voting, which alleviated the pressure on Election Day.
And you did not get any complaints? I know you were running that special election committee. Did you get any
The
complaints?
hotline?
The hotline, yeah.
In any human-run system with so many moving parts, 1,200 plus polling places in New York City and countless more across the state, you're going to have some problems. But we really did not see significant problems in any location other than a large number of machine breakdowns in Suffolk County. But otherwise, it was a pretty smooth election day.
And I'm sorry, I didn't get Valerie's title.
Well, I'm the president of the East 72nd Street Neighborhood Association and a member of Community Board 8 on the Upper East Side of Manhattan.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you all so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye now.
Just counting votes.